Good evening and welcome to the Gold Goats and Guns Hour here on YouTube, Periscope, and DLive. My name is Tom Luongo. I hope you're all having a great day, and we've got a lot to talk about. Tonight I want to get back to geopolitics because I haven't done much of it recently, and we've been focused on Brexit and all this other rotten nonsense, and I want to get back into talking about the Middle East and Trump and all the other things that make, make life worth living, I guess. So going to take a little bit of time to begin the stream here, waiting for everybody to kind of show up in the various platforms. If you are following on Periscope, I'm not monitoring the chat there. I am monitoring the chat over on DLive and over on YouTube because I know that there are people who are either one, vexed with DLive, two, distrustful of it, and three, just flat out frustrated by it. And that's fine. And you'll notice it's the return of my awesome mug. I haven't used it in quite a while. Cleaned it out earlier this evening and forgot to remind myself. It was just, I almost forgot just how fucking fantastic this thing is. All right. We're going to be talking about the Middle East. I want to get kind of caught up to date. There's a lot of things that have happened, a lot of things that are going on. I'm not convinced that I have a full handle on what's going on because so much is happening that God bless the massive mug, and all of that. So the thing I want to talk about, and I think it all kind of stems back towards last week's announcement by the Trump administration that they would be labeling the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as a terrorist organization. Iran immediately responded and did the exact same thing. This has been coming for a little while now. I was reading Elijah Magnier this afternoon before I went, as I was prepping for tonight's show, and he made the very cogent point that really this doesn't change terribly much because we've been ratcheting up the definition of what of Iran's of how we've been ratcheting up the definitions of how we classify Iran's military for years now in order to make it easier to break down the barriers between peace and war. And the truth of the matter is that at this point, while both of these things are, both of these declarations are incredibly dangerous, and there's no argument in any way that this is not a major escalation. It is at the same time also one of those things where you have to kind of ask yourself, are we really doing this? You know, it's like, you know, are we actually going to do this? Is that where John Bolton and company and Netanyahu and the rest of them are pushing this? I was reading Alistair Crook over at Strategic Culture Foundation this afternoon as well. He's got a great article, as he always does. Alistair's one of the most trenchant geopolitical observers on the planet, being a former British diplomat and has connections with everybody around the world. He's quite the worthwhile read because of his knowledge of the people themselves, as of who's involved in all of this. But at the same time, we had a really great statement by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, who literally is like the only man left in the world training diplomats properly, because we don't have diplomats here in the United States. We have Mike Pompeo, and you know, man who never, who never met a smorgasbord he didn't like. And Lavrov was making it abundantly clear recently that he understands the he understands the dynamic of what's actually happening, and that we are transitioning away from the unipolar world as much as John Bolton and Pompeo and Trump and Sheldon Adelson and Netanyahu and the rest of them don't want that to happen. Certainly, most of the people who think they run the world in the West are working overtime to try and stop this from happening. But it's happening, guys. No matter what you try and do, at the end of the day, there's only so much. There's only so much you can hold back the tide. There was a great article. It was a great video by the Alex and Alex over at Duran this afternoon talking about exactly this thing, or a couple days ago, talking about this very thing in relation to the resistance being put up by people around the world, starting well, they traced it all the way back to the bombing of Serbia down in back in the 1990s. For people like me, it became really obvious. That's when I became radicalized on geopolitics. It was the day that the British Parliament stood up to Davis Cameron and said, "No, we're not going to go to war in Syria for you and the globalist elite. We're not doing it." And that was the first time that a Tory majority parliament went against their prime minister in like 100 years. And that's what actually started the beginning of the end of the downfall of the Syrian civil war, which was backed, of course, which was created and backed by the United States, basically, FUCAS, France, United States, the UK, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey. Everybody was involved. Israel, Australia. They were all involved in some ways, but really led by the United States, the UK, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. And everybody else was just there to get like the spoils. Qatar was going to get a pipeline. Turkey was going to get the annex the northern part of Syria and all of that. That was another turning point. That was like the diplomatic turning point. And it was also the big harbinger of Brexit in my mind, right? That it started there, that there was enough popular groundswell against going to war in Syria in the United Kingdom that it forced MPs' hands that they had to do something. And they had to stop this process. And then after that gave Putin enough of an opening to then diffuse the situation, force Obama to back down on his red lines. And everything that has happened since then, from that moment, has been actually really quite predictable, other than the election of Trump. But even the election of Trump, the response to it by the deep state has been completely predictable. Sheldon Adelson forcing on him Zionists like Pompeo and Bolton and the rest of them, forcing on Trump. You can search Tom L on DLive and you will find me, James McCabe, FYI. I type it in all the time just to make sure that it's working. But James McCabe over on YouTube is saying, can't find you on DLive and Periscope. I wouldn't doubt that you can't find me on Periscope because it's almost impossible because they've been shadow banning me for years. Which is why I've almost completely deprecated the platform. But if you just search Tom L, you'll find me on either the mobile app or the desktop app. So the all one word, Tom L, won't be hard. So when you watch what's happening here and you watch and you realize where we are today, that Bolton and company are pushing really hard to continue this unipolar moment for as long as possible. They're realizing that everybody is slipping away from them. And Lavrov said quite succinctly that not only is the unipolar moment over, but we understand that they're centuries long control over global capital, in effect, here in the West. Put us in a position where we just feel entitled to this. The oligarchy here in the West firmly believes that they are entitled to rule the world and to dictate terms to everyone around the world. And that they're not going to give up anytime soon. And they're not going to give up easily. And it's going to have to be forced upon us. Lavrov saying this. It's going to have to be forced upon them by the axis of the resistance, which at this point now is China, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and Lebanon, and soon to be Iraq and others. And so it is. It's what's been going on for quite a long time, and it's fascinating that Lavrov. The point that Alexander Mercouris at the Durham was making is that the point is that Lavrov understands the history of this to the point where. Where he understands the history to the point where he can make those associations and make that all work. Didn't Russia and Turkey sign a $1 billion development deal? Asked Stoyanovich. I think so. I know also that I saw this morning on TASS that the Russian news agency that Rosatom is looking to divest up to 49% of the ownership of the major nuclear power plant that they're building in Turkey. So they're now looking for investors to take over part of the part of the project. Not that they have any problem with drumming up investors or floating the money themselves, and just looking for. But at this point, what Rosatom is looking for is ways to get investors to come into these projects so that they can then start the next project. Because at this point, Rosatom owns something like 2/3 of the worldwide order book for new nuclear power plants around the world. For those of you who don't know that. To Rexman's question, why would they ban me on Periscope? Really? Seriously, dude. I've been stuck between 585 and 600 people on Periscope since 2017. Okay. I didn't see that, Stoyanovich, that the Bulgaria's nuke plant deal is back on as well, but I'm not surprised at all. The Russians are absolutely using Rosatom as an adjunct. It's just like Rosneft and Gazprom and Novitek and others, that they're using them as means by which to do diplomacy. And it's the very smart thing to do. And understand that part of the reason why we're going to ratchet this up against Iran, why we're ratcheting up against Iran now, is a couple of reasons. One was to get Bibi Netanyahu reelected, which it did. And there was a very good chance that he could have lost that election. At least that's what McCurse thinks. I don't know. I've talked to Halsey, my friend Halsey English, about this, who's spent a lot of time in Israel as a journalist. And he's like, there wasn't any real doubt that Netanyahu would become prime minister again. He may have lost the election, but he still would have been able to be the only person to be able to put together a coalition that would have been viable. There's no way Benny Gantz would have been able to do so. I may be wrong about that, but that's his take on it. I'll be on with Halsey and Dustin tomorrow night at 10:30, FYI, as I am every Tuesday night. But there's a lot going on when you start to really look at the situation. There's the Golan Heights and Trump handing that back to Israel. We all know about GGnG and the amount of oil and gas that's under the Golan Heights, but it goes deeper than that, because in the last couple of months, you have Iran cutting port deals with both Syria and Lebanon for leases and access to ports on the Mediterranean at Latakia in Syria, which everybody's heard about. But Elijah Magnier made the point. It's also at Tripoli, not Tripoli in Libya, which is currently under attack by Saudi Arabia. Apparently Saudi Arabia backed forces from General Haftar, but the Tripoli in Lebanon. Those two ports, major ports. The Russians, of course, are interested in further oil and gas exploration off of Lebanon. Lebanon's got a ton of oil and gas resources that they have not been able to develop because of the uncertainty surrounding everything with Israel. So it's very, very interesting from that perspective. So you have all that happening. You have the United States barring anybody from investing in Syria's reconstruction and leaving it mostly to the Chinese, the Russians, and Iranians, which they're going to do anyway. Iraq refuses to listen to the United States over expanding trade with Iran. They're going full tilt boogie, flaunting sanctions on buying electricity from Iran and deepening their cross-border trade, which they need to do. And the whole Shia Crescent, as Stordun would, if he was here, would remind us that the Shia Crescent is being built. And it's and so the question now is, with all of these things happening, with everything going on, it seems odd to me, right, that we would want to be pushing for Iran, for war with Iran, right? Because it's going to cost us everything in the Middle East. And I think Elijah Magnier makes the point, and the very good point, that it's going to cost Israel the most. That's really what it comes down to. It's going to cost Israel the most. I would, because any attack by the U.S. on Iran, or vice versa, Iran is not going to attack first. That Putin's not going to allow it. Iran's not stupid. Soleimani is not dumb. They're all going to wait until the absolute last moment. They're going to have to make the Americans attack them. And it's going to have to be another Serbia moment, right? This is one of the reasons why Alex and Alex brought that up as the turning point where the globalists, the Davos crowd went too far, right? Bill Clinton and then back then it would be Madeleine Albright, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, and those guys doing the works of guys like Soros and the rest of them back, and the Rockefellers and all that shit back then. When they went too far was when they bombed Serbia, when NATO bombed a European country with European forces. So the question is, if we start a war with Iran, and I'm not discounting that I don't think that that's going to happen, but I'm telling you that if it were going to happen, because it's not like anybody truly wants it other than Israel. But if Israel thinks that they can win a war with Iran, because the United States will back them up, and they not get turned into a parking lot, they're insane. Right? And I know that, at this point, no one would win that war. The Israelis wouldn't win it. They might have the best air force, but they're not going to win. The Iron Dome is not going to stop Hezbollah's rockets. It's not going to stop the Syrian army. And frankly, it's not going to stop Iran's ballistic missiles. And everybody knows this. So, Mel Vaccaro says, in my opinion, Iran is a harder nut to crack. It's a much harder nut to crack. Not even close to being the same amount. The same thing. So, but if you look at what's happening, if there's going to be a war with Iran, it's going to happen soon. Okay? Waivers, the oil waivers for buying Iranian oil end on May 3rd. Expect John Bolton to tell Trump to ratchet up the pressure, right? It's only going to get worse from here. These guys only understand one thing and one thing only, which is beat people harder. Beat them harder. If they're not listening to you, beat them harder. If it doesn't work, beat them harder. So, that's how that works, and that's who we're dealing with at this point. And they only understand one thing because they only ever had to understand one thing, which is we're in charge. We cannot show weakness. Remember, it's always incredibly important to remember that when you're the big boy on the block, you can't show weakness. It's why the EU doesn't negotiate. That's why the United States doesn't negotiate. We dictate. And so we have to continue dictating, because if we don't, we're going to look weak. And the sad part about it is that but everybody knows that we have to negotiate at some point. Otherwise, we have to ratchet it up to the point where we're willing to nuke everybody. Because the financial warfare is only going to last for so long. Venezuela is eventually going to start using Russia and China's versions of SWIFT. It's coming. So eventually, Venezuela will get around the SWIFT expulsion and all the sanctions and everything else, and start being able to do banking and business in Russia and China. The Russians and the Chinese banks are linking up together. Okay, they're going to link in Iran's banks. If necessary, they'll all start using freaking cryptocurrencies if they need to. So you have to realize that all of these mechanisms, these bits of technology, are already there, right? So it's all the stuff is already in place, right? So and all these systems, all they have to do is be turned on. And the best the United States could do at this point is to withdraw more dollar liquidity and try and crash all the emerging markets around the world. But the thing about it is that we've already proven that. They tried that with Turkey last year, and it nearly took down the European banking system. So they can't do that either. That's why Trump is, calling for lower interest rates. It's, Larry Kudlow was out there today saying, hey, Trump is going to, is trying to play hardball again with Congress about spending cuts and sequestration and all this shit. And I'm like, yeah, come on, pull the other leg. It plays Jingle Bells. If I read through that stuff. I'm like, you got to be crazy. Okay. So, I mean, you've gone too far when the Chinese start calling you out in non-diplomatic terms, right? The Chilean ambassador to China just called out Mike Pompeo as crazy, that what he says are lies, and just because you lie 1,000 times doesn't make the lie any less a lie. Mr. Pompeo is crazy. His body is in the 21st century, but his mind is in the 20th century, stuck in the Cold War. And the Chinese have just effectively thrown down the gauntlet. They never talk in these terms. They're always unfailingly polite. Same thing with the Russians. And the Russians have now ditched all of their diplomatic rhetoric when it comes to the United States. And we've always known that this was going to happen. We've always known that no matter what happened, the empire would not go gentle into that good night. They would always, always, always make everybody pay as much as possible for their resistance. But at some point, once you ratchet the costs of compliance up high enough, it becomes cheaper to resist. And that's where we are. All right. Rick Farmer says on YouTube, Chinese restraint and subtlety is probably misinterpreted as weakness. Well, in the minds of people like Netanyahu and Bolton and the rest of them, yes. The major player in all this is which way does Russia jump? And Alistair Crook's article does not answer that question. He just brings up all of those questions, which is very important. Perhaps they'll bomb another Chinese embassy by mistake, i.e. a Serbian reference, yes. Yeah, but aren't these SWIFT alternatives going to be run by fundamentally the same banksters that SWIFT is? No, if they're not based, Elvicaro, you're missing the point. I mean, yeah, in effect, if you're looking at it from like a central banker's point of view, well, or from a libertarian's point of view, and how much we hate central banking, well, yes. But if we're talking about, you got to remember at the end of the day, I always said years ago, well before I ever thought about getting on YouTube or writing publicly or anything else, I remember telling my coworkers at work, who all thought I was a lunatic, by the way. I said, look, what the big fight that's going on is this. It's our central banks versus their central banks. May the best central bank win. In the end, I'm going to wind up being right about that statement. And I made that statement back in 2006. Okay? That ultimately that's what this is about. And that, because eventually the central banks would have to be pitted against each other. And so that's what we have now. So Russia and China's central banks are going to form an antipode to the West, the BIS, the IMF, the Fed, the ECB, the rest. That's what they have to do in order to allow any form of coordinated resistance that allows capital to move. Because look, you can't fight a war if you can't move money around, right? And you know this is a real threat. You know this is a real war when only one side is being threatened with expulsion from the financial system. That the United States is willing to sanction everybody to the point of starving people, of losing its moral high ground, while demonstrable sons of bitches and ruthless people like Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and Nikki Haley and the rest of them all try and say we're bombing you in the name of humanity. No one believes that shit anymore. No one buys it. But the only people who buy that crap anymore are morons like Amy Poehler, who still think that Madeleine Albright is somebody to look up to. Give me a fucking break. So the PBOC is different. It's not private. In many ways, it's a big game. It is publicly owned. It is owned by the government. It is not a private central bank. So how do we keep the bankster war from spreading to flying lead? It's a good question. We're doing it for the children. It's a good question. I don't know. So thank you all for the donations as they're trickling in. I really do appreciate them. Didn't want to stop the rant. All right, so opening remarks here are pretty much over. I just wanted to kind of connect some dots tonight. You've got the ports, the Iran having port access on the Mediterranean is a big deal. Turkey refusing to not buy S-400s is a big deal. It's important because the S-400s, because remember, Turkey has no air force to speak of, and Greece's air force is exemplary. So if there's any kind of war between NATO and Turkey, okay, then the Greek Air Force is something to be reckoned with. It's something that Erdogan has to deal with, or Erdogan has to deal with. But the only thing I can think of here, when you strip away all the rhetoric and you strip away all the provocations, you strip away all of this stuff, how far is everybody willing to push? And the truth of the matter is that Trump is so freaking weak that these guys are running roughshod over him in every way, manner, shape, and form. And so the question isn't what Trump is willing to do at this point. The question is what Bolton is willing to do. And John Bolton is the worst kind of warmonger. He's someone who's never actually experienced it. And to him, it's just about leverage. It's just about moving pieces on a board. He's the worst kind of psychopath. He's the psychopath who's never actually been punched in the mouth. The man could stand to go to a martial arts class and get punched once or twice. You might realize just how much it sucks to be an aggressive douchebag. So insane. So think about all that stuff. Alistair Kirk was bringing up all the stuff about Libya and Algeria and all of this stuff, and how the Saudis and the Gulf states are all really worried at this point. They're not sure what to do with what's happening here, and so they've let loose Haftar to as a warning, in his mind, as a warning to the rest of North Africa and to the rest of the Middle East that, step out of line, and, to the Muslim Brotherhood and the rest. If you, the Muslim Brotherhood, that if you step out of line, that we're just going to, we're going to start a war. And that's never a strong position. We're going to start a war. If you don't do what we want, we're going to attack you. That's not acting from a position of strength. The Russians have now upgraded the United States to a level that is commensurate with being ready to fight a war. So the Russians are ready to fight a war against the United States, and they have hypersonic missiles. So you can kiss most of our naval assets goodbye within 15 minutes. So if you think if Kay Bailey Hutchinson, that Rhodes Scholar, thinks that we're gonna that she's gonna send NATO ships through the Kerch Strait over the Russians' dead bodies, you're crazy, because that's not gonna happen. Bolton's famous quote is not about not wanting to die in a rice paddy. It's not wanting to die in a rice paddy for no reason, because the Vietnam War was pointless. If the Vietnam War was worth fighting, according to John Bolton, when he was oh so worldly and in high school, he would have gone. I don't see how we can invade Iran. Good evening, Liberty Cat. How are you, love? Says Alexander Kalish on YouTube. Cost would be $1 trillion minimum, and you would have to build up a force in theater. The Russians have 100 megaton thermobaric bombs. Yes, they do. So, the subs would be gone as well. Yeah, I mean the fleet carriers, the fleets, the most of the subs as well. The Russians did test new missiles recently. They also put up a show about the S-300s and 400s. Yeah, funny how Bolton can see that that the war's not worth it when it's his ass on the line, not everybody else's. Taking out the grid would kill millions. Yeah, you have to remember that none of us are safe here in this kind of situation. In this kind of situation where the whole thing breaks out into a big, huge affair, I'm telling you, Israel doesn't survive this. I honestly think that a certain level, 90%, at least half of this is pure opportunism on the part of Netanyahu. Well, I got this dumbass in the White House who's willing to do everything I want him to do, so I might as well keep doing it. I might as well keep pushing to see how far I can go. We can get everything we ever wanted. We can get the United States to like create greater Zionist Israel for us. Oh, yeah, give me more of that. What am I going to do? Say no? When you really stop to think about it, if you're Netanyahu, would you really just say no to Trump saying, oh, yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah, I can give you that too. Yeah, I can give you that. Well, how about the moon? Can we have the moon too? Oh, yeah, why not? I don't care. I love Israel. Fucking retard. So does that mean that Bolton would have fought in Vietnam if it was next door to Israel? I don't know. Was John Bolton the Zionist stooge when he was 18? I don't freaking know. I used to think the neocons would do anything to save Israel, but it really seems they think it's expendable now. I don't think so. I don't think that at all. I think they're actually doing this in the delusion, Tenjin, that they can win all of this. I really do think that. Stoyanovich says, I saw an article in which Iran, Iraq, and Syria are about to negotiate a rail line. Yeah, that's happening. Iran's going to build a major highway from Baghdad. I think it's from Baghdad all the way to Latakia. This is all happening, and all the U.S. can do, and I've been saying this for a long time, all the U.S. can do is be a fly in the ointment and like leave troops at a border crossing at Al Tanf and maintain control over the majority of Syrian oil production. But there's plenty of Syrian gas out there that the Russians can develop. The Kurds are going to have to give up their hope for independence and backing by the Americans. That's because that's not going to work. None of that's going to work at the end of the day. Erdogan, if he needs to, will invade across the Syrian border and force a conflict there, north of Aleppo, without a doubt, and at Bambij. I mean, all of this stuff. And at the end of the day, the only reason that Israel continues to think that they can get away with any of this is because the Russians aren't willing to let the Syrians shoot down an F-16. Because they know at that point the Israelis will lose their mind. So, it's just... Good evening, Edward Abbey. How are you? The Kurds are screwed if the Turks close the border and no one allows that oil to flow to the market. So, agreed. So Jonathan asks, what does Putin think of Israel? Well, Putin understands that what Putin has been doing with Israel, with Netanyahu, is to try and work both sides of it, to try and keep everybody from. He's really what Putin has been trying to do is keep the entire conflict at a low simmer. And Netanyahu keeps asking him for more and more and more in order to keep it at a low simmer, because Trump keeps offering Netanyahu even more support. So it's insane. And at some point, Netanyahu is going to ask for something that Putin's just like, no, you can't have all of that. It's not going to happen. And when that occurs, that's when the moment of truth happens. And everything that we do, I saw something the other day, a great quote that, why did we do this? Why did we make the IRGC a terrorist? Why did we denominate them a terrorist? It's to ensure that Trump has no room to negotiate. It's to ensure that Congress doesn't reverse the Democrats don't reverse Trump's decision to leave the JCPOA. It's a way of ensuring that whatever is currently policy stays policy, regardless of any changes politically. Isn't one of the globalist goals a population reduction by billions? Yeah, some of them. I don't know, but at the end of the day, if they want to continue to control everything, well, they kind of need to continue to suck the world dry of billions of people. So I don't know. I'm not crazy about it. I mean, maybe. The spokesman of the Russian presidency, Dmitry Peskov, praised the firmness with which Turkey resists U.S. pressure, tries to dissuade Ankara from buying Russian S-400 missile systems. Of course, Peskov that's his job. So, Alexander Kalish, El Vaquero says that he's close to ground zero as to where everything would blow up. And Alexander Kalish reminds everybody that the Russians are now scared and are putting big warheads on their birds from 2 megatons to about 25. Won't matter how close you are, you will light like a match to about 80 miles out. Why did the Democrats want to join the JCPOA? Because the Democrats are the ones that negotiated it in the first place, because it's a pact towards... Because it weakens... Trump pulled out of the JCPOA because it weakens Israel. Negotiating position vis-a-vis Iran in the long run. The Europeans want, and the Democrats would have no problem rejoining the JCPOA because Europe wants access to cheap Iranian oil, and the Democrats ultimately are in the thrall of the European elites who want the EU to take over from the United States. Let's just kind of put it there for a minute. You came here for the flat earth. Yeah, so we're not doing flat earth here tonight. So yeah, let's get away from that for a second. All right, what else we got? We're at 37 minutes. So when we put it all together, right? If you look at why, if you look at it, why, what do I want to say now? I don't know. Actually, I don't even know. When you put all this together, it's all incredibly dangerous, and it's all. But it's all bad, and it's not just dangerous. It's all bad in the long run, right? Because Iran is not going to knuckle under. They're not going to give in. They don't have to give in. They've been preparing for war with the United States for 40 years now. They've armed Hezbollah to the teeth. So, you know, at a certain level, Israel is going to have to come to terms with the fact that they are truly in a tactically poor position. And it's just not going to happen under Netanyahu's watch, because unfortunately the Israelis have become, as a, you know, the only thing that would have been worse than Netanyahu winning was Netanyahu losing. Because anybody who would have come to power outside of Netanyahu would be even more of a hardliner than he is. Bolton wants to pressure Iran. So Tension's asking on YouTube, wouldn't this year be best? Would think next year's too close to the election? It's too unpredictable. That's a good point. It's a very good point, as a matter of fact. But it's even deeper than that. I think that this year is important because it's not just the election, right? I think that the longer the situation holds in its current form, and I'm including Ukraine in this now as well, that by the end of 2019, Nord Stream 2 will likely be active. Turk Stream is already will be pumping gas into Turkey and over to Serbia. The Serbs are already announced that the construction on their leg of Turk Stream has already begun, right? The European Union could look completely different by the end of 2019. Okay? we can have a full-blown financial crisis between now and then, which honestly, if all of that starts to play itself out, we could wind up in a war scenario anyway. Because once economies start to go into the tank, you have that going on as well. The longer Syria remains relatively stable, and parts of it can be rebuilt, and some people go home. Every day that happens, Syria gets stronger. Every day that Syria gets stronger makes it that much harder for any kind of offense against the region. You know, you're not going to the plan for, you know, weak Sunnistan, Shiistan, and Kurdistan. You know, these kind of weak statelets. You know, after everybody's been atomized, after all the current Sykes-Picot borders are all destroyed. That's not happening. Okay? That's not happening. And so, Nord Stream 2 will be online by September or October if the Danes will give Gazprom the permit. Now they're asking for a third route. And they're just stalling at this point. This is just the Danes bowing to U.S. pressure to stop Nord Stream 2. And at some point, you know, Nord Stream 2 will just not go through Danish waters. It doesn't have to go through Danish waters. And the Danes don't have to get any money. But, you know, we'll see what happens here. The thing is, Edward Abbey says, because those who truly rule the U.S. understand they are outclassed by Russia in terms of missile tech. They know that they have not the winning hand any longer. This is dangerous and rats in the corner. There's that in terms of sure missile technology, but in terms of nuclear weapons capabilities, no, the Russians aren't even close to us. I mean, our 7 warhead spread. I don't remember the name of the damn thing. Is unmatched, and with the amount of damage it can do. And so in conventional warfare, yes, we don't stand a chance. All of our assets are at extreme risk. And I said this the day that that Putin announced all these weapons. I said Vladimir Putin just changed the world. The neocons now are on a timer to attack Iran, destroy Russia, and bring China to heel. I said this in March of 2018. And it's playing out now. I know it's called a MIRV, but there's a particular like warhead or missile type. That's it. I know what a MIRV is. But thank you. So it really is about how serious is Iraq about kicking out U.S. troops? It seems like they succeed. It would make an Iran conflict unfeasible. That's the next stage of this. I was going to bring that point up. Tensions, you're just slightly ahead of me. Iran is putting serious pressure on Iraq to disinvite the United States. We talked about this on Friday. We'll continue to bring this up. And anytime anybody has any information about that, you know, ping me if I miss it. But it's really important to know that there's a bill worming its way through. I think there are bills worming their way through the Iraqi parliament to get to that point. So again, this is another thing. The timer is ticking at this point. So the United States now has to make a choice. Are we or are we not going to attack Iran for Israel? And if that's the case, you know, where does that end? And, you know, there comes a point where you have to ask yourself, where do the Israelis think that they can, you know, outfly everybody? Because it's not going to be, and this is the thing, it's like, it's going to, you know, the Israelis are willing to fly jets over Iran and bomb Tehran. The only reason that hasn't happened is because we told them they're not allowed. Did I discuss NATO entering the Sea of Azov? I did not. They haven't yet, as far as I know. I I've already discussed the fact that I don't think it's going to happen. If they do try to make it happen, the Russians are going to defend it. The Russians are not going to allow NATO to push them around in the Sea of Azov. It's not going to happen. That's a red line for Putin at this point. And we know that. And so that's why that shit like that comes out of Kay Bailey Hutchinson's mouth and not out of Bolton's mouth and not out of Trump's mouth. So. Yeah, it's crazy. So, switching gears a little bit, Jonathan asks, does Brexit still have a chance of happening? It does. It's going to take Theresa May being removed from office for it to have any chance. And I don't know that that's on the docket right now. Brexit is now off the radar for a little while. I think everybody's going to keep their mouths shut until after the European parliamentary elections. So there is the court option, right? There is you're asking about the court option, Stoyanovich. So what Stoyanovich is talking about is there is a legal challenge that's worming its way through the British courts right now as to whether or not Theresa May was even legally allowed to ask for the extension that she did in the way that she did. And there's two different acts that had to have been amended. And they amended the one act because they know they could get away with it. But the actual withdrawal act hasn't been amended. And so at this point, it's kind of like legal fiction. So FYI, DC, Franz is in the YouTube chat. So, oh wait, so this is about Brexit? No, we were talking about everything else, but yeah, I do. Well, good evening, Orange Beer. Cool. I have talked about Brexit a lot. I've talked about Brexit like more probably than just about anybody else. So, and we'll continue to talk about it if we need to a little bit. Tenjin, you're correct. Tenjin says that he's amazed that Assad survived the onslaught in Syria. He may be saying there's a turning point in history books. Again, it comes down to two very major points. One, the day that the British Parliament voted down to join the U.S. invasion after the chemical weapons attack in Ghouta. Was Ghouta, right? And then back in 2013, and then after Putin moved in, that was the turning point of the war, and then from there it was just a matter of time. And that's why I said so, DC, is to give you an opportunity if you want to go back and troll him. I was talking about Brexit a little bit because we're now down into this point of the evening, Orange Beer, that I do Q&A, so I'm really just reading the comments at this point and answering questions. My prepared remarks are mostly prepared remarks with the first 20 minutes or so. We do this every Monday night at 8 and Friday night at 8:30. And for those of you on YouTube, I'm also streaming over at DLive, where you can directly contribute without having to pay Google 30%. Not that I've monetized my YouTube channel at this point for a variety of reasons. But DLive is the means by which I'm going to monetize doing all the streaming. So if you guys want to, be a part of that, you can come over here, make an account. I'll put the thing in. Hold on. Yeah, I am laundering people through multiple platforms because I like to get them all onto one platform, but I'm going to keep all platforms open. I've mostly gotten rid of Periscope, and it's actually really quite happy. So yeah. What else is going on? I'm going to go look around a little bit. Ding, 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 ding. there was something I wanted to talk about. Something else I wanted to talk about. It is terrible what happened with Notre Dame. There's no other way to discuss it. I don't even really really want to cover it, because what am I going to say that hasn't already been said, or isn't, it's awful. It's something that's it's just awful, and it would scare me to death. It would scare me to death to find out in the end that this wasn't an accident, and that it's time to now start burning down our history, because the history of white people and Christianity and Catholicism is all evil and needs to be burned down. The D stands for decentralized, meaning it's a cryptocurrency based platform. Whereas, so while you're on the platform on DLive, if you're especially through the mobile app, because right now they don't have that running through the desktop interface, but through the mobile app, you will be effectively, I think, mining in the background, or at the very least, while you're watching, you'll be earning credits, which you'll be earning, tokens that you can then build into your account, and then you can donate to creators, or you can lock for rewards on the streams that you've taken part of. So it's very similar to Steam in the way it's built in, the way Steam is built, in that the more you interact with the platform, the more you'll earn, and the more you bank to be a member of the network by having banked points, what they call locked points, but they're really banked points. You can get them out later. You will just get them doled out to you on a kind of an annuity basis. But you then have voting rights within the system. You also get rewards based on effectively how many points you've had banked. So the more points you bank, the higher the proportion of the reward pool that every stream that you were a part of, that you watched, you commented on, or you produced, will come to you at the end of the 7-day period where rewards for that stream are accruing. Okay. So from that perspective, you're earning points, and then you can also just flat out buy them and donate them to your favorite streamers, your favorite content creators, so that they will have a means by which to continue doing so, and you directly support their work without having to subscribe to Patreon or, give Google 30. Because, if we did super chats on YouTube, Google takes 30%. You donate $5 to me, Google takes $1.66. Or $1.35 or whatever it is, $1.50. Crazy. So, evening, Ray. I'm glad you do follow me on Twitter. So I'm glad you're here for the first time. The stream I did on tax day earlier today, thank you. I appreciate that. That was fun. I have, we've been doing, again, we've been doing a lot of heavy stuff, but I really wanted to sit back and kind of just talk about, I got done doing my taxes yesterday, honestly, and I texted my wife, who was out of town. She was taking her parents back home to Ohio for the summer. And I texted her yesterday, oh, by the way, the taxes are done. We only owe blah. And which was a lot less than blah than I was expecting. And she's like, well, that's good. And I explained to her why. And she's like, well, you're going to have to say nice things about Trump because of that. I'm like, yeah, I'll wrap it in. I'll have to wrap that in, I'll have to wrap it in something terrible. Not like, peanut butter inside of as opposed to chocolate, some shit, because I'm still angry with Trump about everything else. But at least for small business owners, for home and for the self-employed, Trump's tax cuts at the middle class level are actually really, really good. So, understanding, all right, so what have we got? What have I missed here? I heard that, wow, Tin Man says that he heard that Shepard Smith on Fox shut down discussion of the previous church attacks. Now that's telling, because there have been 10 attacks on churches in France over the last week. Jonathan, you should consider some activism. At least get it out of your system. You're young, from what I understand. You're young enough and committed enough that you should do some activism. Everybody should go. Everybody who is politically woke at some point, I'm telling you, you go through the process. Even if it's not for you in the end, you'll find out why it's not for you, and you'll find out why politics sucks. At the very least, you may find out it works for you, and if it does work for you, great. If you think you can make a better world that way, then try. Just remember that you're trying to reform a system that resists all forms of reform, because it is fundamentally at its core, all political processes are corrupt. So, Shepard Smith makes your skin crawl and you can't figure out why. DC, how about because he's creepy? That's why. I was just lazy and did mine today. I'm self-employed. It takes me about 3 or 4 days of work on and off to actually do to get all the paperwork together, to total up all the deductions and all the stuff for, you know, home use of business and all that stuff. It takes me a not insignificant amount of time to do my taxes. And Stan, while I was doing mine, Stan was doing everybody else's. So Stan M is an accountant. So rumors are that there were 2 fires. Wow. You should focus on the local level. You shouldn't even focus at the state level. Jonathan, if you're going to do activism, be active in your local county. Start there. Trust me, county politics is hard enough. El Vaquero says, you have to accept a certain amount of corruption in yourself in politics if you want to get anything done. Correct. I'd personally be fine blackmailing the hell out of colleagues if I were in Congress. Yeah, me too. Oh, trust me, dude, you wouldn't want to see me in... You wouldn't want to see me in Congress. I'd be the biggest son of a bitch you ever saw. Politics, Alexander Kalish, politics are inherently corrupt. The whole process is corrupt. By definition, the state creates vectors of corruption. So, but this being tax day, it just reminds you that those vectors of corruption are all funded via taxation. Yeah, I don't know how anybody lives in Palm Beach County, Peachy Tree. I just don't. I don't understand. I mean, I have friends who are down in both Broward and West Palm. I worked in Stewart, just up the road, for years, and politics is blood sport, but it's blood sport because it's people fighting over stolen money. Never forget that. It's people fighting over stolen money. And it's a playground for psychopaths. It's where psychopaths go to get their psychopath on. Remember, Chapter 10 to the Road to Serfdom. Why do the worst get on top? It's beyond Corruption County. Yeah, it's like crazy. Yep, I am right. That's the state. They bleed the people. Yep. Friends, it's stolen money. I earned it. Y'all steal it. There's no other way around it. Taxation is theft, like it or not. Mr. Psychopath goes to Washington. It's true. The state has no capital of its own that it did not appropriate for itself. Even debt is just theft, is just taxation by another form. Inflation is just taxation by another form. Because you're thieving from future labor at interest. You would be correct, Tenjin. If politics is psychopaths, corporate America is sociopaths. Yeah, pretty much. So corporatocracy is the psychopaths and the sociopaths getting together and ruling the world. That's why I'm an anarchist, guys. It's the only system I can defend. I'm not even crazy about it. Oh, bullshit. Those firefighters could be employed by... So France says, it's theft to fund those firefighters who are not saving the cathedral, by the way. It's not theft. They're fighting as firefighters. They always bring out the firefighters or some other moral high ground bullshit. At the end of the day, those firefighters could have been employed by a fucking insurance company, paid better wages, given better fucking tools than the very bare minimum that they get from the state that they get through taxes. When you expropriate money from people at gunpoint, do you get the best from them or the worst from them? Do you get the most from them or the least from them? I can tell you right now that everybody spends all day long. Ask Stan. Stan does people's taxes for a living. What's his job? To minimize their tax burden. Okay, now everybody wants to pay as little as possible for the services that they get in this life, but they also understand quality. They also understand the idea that if sometimes it's better to pay more for quality service, that gives me a higher tier of service or a low, whatever. You don't have that. What you have is whatever the state is willing to give you. Period. Whatever the state can expropriate at gunpoint. Me personally, the people who have a vested interest in my house burning down, which is my insurance company, are the ones that should be providing my fire protection. They're the ones who should be my building inspectors. Because the government's building codes, which all they do is rip that off from the electricians and everybody else in the first place. They just ask them, well, what do you guys do? What's your best practice? And they go, fine, they write that into the code. But then the building inspector comes by, but we have to then still pay the building inspector to come by and inspect our fucking house, that we did it at that level to that code, which we could have had an electrician do anyway, which the electrician was going to do anyway. Why cut out the middleman? Just have the building inspector be a member of the insurance company. Or somebody else. Or third-party insurance company or third-party reinsurer or something along those lines. A number of solutions is better than the one we currently have, where the state has all the authority but none of the responsibility, because the state signs off on my fucking house, that's up to code, but if my house burns down from an electrical fire, my insurance company's still on the hook. Not the state, not the building inspector. Does the building inspector lose his job for doing a bad job for inspecting my house? No, he doesn't. He shows up the next morning and continues to do a crappy job until he can either be promoted out of that job so he doesn't suck at it anymore, or he retires on the taxpayer's dime for the rest of his life. Yeah, fuck a whole lot of that bullshit. There ain't nothing worse than a fucking lib arguing for fucking firefighters via taxation. There are very few things in this life that actually make me angrier, because it's so fucking patently stupid. Because if France wasn't a socialist fucking shithole, Notre Dame wouldn't have burned down today. If the French government wasn't a bunch of fucking socialist twats who have stolen 80 to 90% of the French people's fucking money for the last fucking 150 years, there would have been enough capital to keep that fucking building from burning down. It would have been renovated properly multiple times in the last 150 years. I'm no fan of insurance companies, but I'm no fan of insurance companies and this fucking ridiculous corporatocracy. Let them rise and fall of their own accord. The insurance companies we have today are all freaking nightmares, or corporate is nightmares, because half of them have regulatory capture over the fucking government that they use to then not pay anybody out, because the court system is just as goddamn corrupt. Why? Because it's funded by taxes. My suspicion is that France is funded by some money taken from me. You would be right. Righteous Tom is the best Tom. It's true. I mean, there are many things in this life slightly that are fundamentally worse than libs complaining about socialized firefighting. Of course. But really, when you stop to think about it, it's like one of the easiest things to fucking debunk. It's one of the easiest things to destroy. One of the easiest arguments in the world to destroy. The Private Production of Defense by Hans Hermann Hoppe is an old article he wrote back in, I don't know, fucking 1999 or 2000. It's a great article. It's one of the few. It's one of those things you read in this life that when you're finished reading it, you go, huh, that's life changing. That changes the way you view the world. Same thing with The Road to Serfdom. You read it and you're like, especially that chapter 10. You read that and you're like, yes, he's right. God damn it. This is the way things actually work. Okay? And you've got to realize, and I urge you, just look that article up. It's called The Private Production of Defense by Hans Hermann Hoppe. And Hoppe spelled H-O-P-P-E. One of the greatest, it's a scholarly article. It's 8 to 10 pages long, but it just talks kind of mechanistically about how we could produce defense and why we would produce defense and when we wouldn't, of all types. From the local level to the national level, all of it, and how you define defending your property, and how defense is defined, and how it's just a brilliantly argued mechanistic argument as to why we don't actually need governments to provide defense for us, why we would be far better off with the private production thereof. Because here's the thing: if the fire department doesn't show up to keep your house from burning down, can you fire them? Now, I say this knowing full well that my fire department in High Springs, right, showed up to save my house from being burned down last summer. I say this. And it was only because 3 months earlier, Columbia and Alachua County finally got together and said, yeah, the local fire department just on the other side of the Santa Fe River, which is 5 minutes away or 10 minutes away, as opposed to the one in fucking Ellisville, which is 25 minutes away, can serve my house. It took them 50 freaking years to sign that agreement. They finally got it done 3 months before my stupid neighbors started burning trash, or started burning yard trash next to 20 acres worth of planted pines on a day with a 25-mile-an-hour wind blowing right at my house. The fire department got there and stopped the fire from jumping the fire line to my line of cedar trees on my property, to my outbuilding, to my house, literally 5 minutes. And still, and I thank them, and I was very appreciative. It's the only option I have. And still, I will argue to you that that is not something I would still prefer to not have that situation. I would still prefer to know, because living where I live, and knowing, and my insurance company would have looked at the rates on my house and everything else and would have figured out where, one, to put a fire station, and two, how to stock it properly and everything else. And I would also know what my insurance rates would be. My insurance rates would be higher because I would be at a greater fire risk. And I was for years until they made that arrangement. That arrangement changed my homeowner's insurance by $200 a year. I got like a 20% discount. The point is that it doesn't matter that my house burned down. My house did burn down in this example. My house could have my house did burn down with the government fire department. If the private fire department let my house burn down, one, I would have somebody to fucking sue for my house. Two, the company that didn't do the job would be probably, if they were an adjunct of the insurance company would lose a whole lot of money. They're under a profit motive to have that not happen. They have an incentive for my house not to burn down. The government has no incentive to not burn down my fucking house, to save my house. Just like the police have no duty to protect you. Do you understand? How can you be a leftist in the modern world knowing that the police won't fucking protect you, and yet you still think we should all take all the fucking guns away? Hey, we should do the same thing for our houses. The fire department is under no compunction to actually save your house. If it's too dangerous for them, they won't do it. They will stand there and let it burn to the fucking ground. Meanwhile, you've been paying them how much money a year, your entire life, for when the fucking thing happens, they're supposed to be there. I got lucky. They showed up in time. I was very calm throughout it. I just walked upstairs, packed a bag, put all the gold and silver in the back of the car, and was literally ready to drive away before my house burned down. My daughter was crying. My wife was frantic. I'm like, it's just stuff. The house is insured. We'll move on. This is the house my daughter was born in, for fuck's sake. Whatever. The people are safe. Open up the gates. Let the goats out. Let the dogs and the goats run free and get away from the fire. Because if that had happened, the whole area would have went up in flames. My whole property would have burned. All 20 acres of my property, Endolino State Park, would have burned. That's how close it was to getting completely beyond the capabilities of the High Springs Fire Department and the 2 trucks that they brought out. You have to have skin in the game. You have to care. Oh, we're fine. I know they do that. Of course they. Of course, I'm not. Don't take this the wrong way. I have a lot of respect for my fire department. We brought them presents afterwards, okay, for saving our home. Okay, the same thing. My dad was NYPD for 24 years. State trooper before that. Okay, I've got civil servants all over my family. I get it. Most of them do the job because it's the only job that it's the job that they wound up in. My dad certainly wound up as a police officer because he couldn't, because of circumstance. It was the best job he could get at the time, with a GED, because he was thrown out of high school for talking back to his Jewish teacher during World War II. FYI. I get it. It's not about the individuals who do the job. It's not about them not wanting to do the job. It's not about the individuals. It's not even about the individual fire departments or the individual police officers or the individual police departments. It's not about that. It's about the mechanism. It's about the perverse incentives that are there and how those incentives are not working for you, the person paying for the service. The incentives are all misaligned. And if they do a good job, or even if they do a great job, it's not necessarily what they're supposed to, not even necessarily, you should just consider yourself incredibly lucky that they're that conscientious. Because they don't have to be under any circumstances. And Tin Man reminds us there's always a huge difference between the people actually doing the job, who usually get into the job for the right reasons, and the administration making the money decisions and. Whatever. Johnny Reb, my dad was NYPD. It was a job. He hated it. I don't know whether he was good at his job or bad at his job. I have no idea. He never talked about the job. It was a way to put food on his family's table. That was it. And when he felt like he was comfortable enough that he could do so, he retired. And he never looked back. And he was ashamed of the fact that he was a police officer. FYI. Because he didn't view it as a real job. Because he understood what it was. I've literally had this exact same argument with my vaguely libertarian cousin who is also retired NYPD. We had these exact same arguments for years, and he mostly agrees with me. And then he says what Jonathan says. The vast majority of the individual officers and firefighters themselves are good people. Of course they are. They're generally conscientious people, attracted to those jobs but you know, they would, the thing is that they would flourish in a better system. Those people who do the job now under these bureaucratic nightmares would do an even better job. Not every individual police or every individual fire department would be better. No, of course, there are going to be outliers on one end versus the other. But in general, the service would be better. And the service would innovate and improve over time. And it would do so at the cost relative to what it was that the society was willing to pay for it, not what the society could expropriate from itself. Governments are always in competition with the private sector. Well, psychopaths are attracted to power. Stan. Government destroyed private charity by introducing the welfare state. Yep. All right, guys, it's been an hour and 20 minutes and I'm tired. I need to stop this one before I flame out. If the tree-hugging libtards, I prefer shit lib, actually, would let the dead trees be cut down and cleared, the fires wouldn't be as bad as they are now. No argument. No argument. So many trolls, not enough time. All right, you guys, I've enjoyed it, as always. Appreciate everybody who's signed up on DLive. We're trying to get to 200 people on DLive so that we can get to the next level of contributor, which brings more perks to the streams. They get higher encoding priority. We get the ability to subscribe to the channel at that point, so you can give a recurring donation to the channel if you so choose. So anybody who's listening on YouTube right now, you know, if you haven't signed up with DLive, go ahead and do so, and then find me /Tom Luongo, and I'd appreciate it. All right, you guys take care. You have a great night. We will talk again. I don't know, maybe Wednesday. Maybe Wednesday. We'll see. And definitely Friday night at 8:30 as always. You guys take care. Keep your stick on the ice.